Hello and welcome to Faith Works Live. And you know in Iowa we don't like to brag, but I will say we have the best motto ever. Our state motto, I absolutely love having, I did like the fourth grade notebook where you had to write down all 50 states and their mottos, and Iowa's was always the best. It's our liberties we prize and our rights we will maintain. Isn't that awesome? Don't you wish you lived here? We absolutely love it. And it's true. And our state legislators actually take that job very seriously. And we are blessed to have one of them on the line right now. Senator Kevin Alons is with us, and he has a long history in family service or in civil service as well. And his family, you probably know that name. He has been serving his district now. This is his first term, which explains why he's got so much to get done. I will say it's always the newbies that are willing to come in and shake things up, which we absolutely love. He is a retired Air National Guard colonel, military pilot. He's also a business owner, software architect, husband and father, and we absolutely love that he's able to make time today to talk about a very important issue on our airwaves. Senator, it's wonderful to have you with us. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
Well, our audience knows I'm no stranger to politics and to controversial positions, but typically I feel like that's understatement of the century for those who know me well. That's why I'm laughing. But the issues we normally talk about are things like life, family, parental rights, education, homeschooling for the children, protecting women. So this is a little bit of a different foray for us. But I'm sure that folks that are listening to the show, if they're Iowa residents, have been seeing headlines lately about some type of pipeline. And maybe they know a little bit more about it, maybe not. But this has become such a big issue. It kind of, I think, cropped up back during the caucuses was probably the first time I heard about it, became aware of it. Vivek Ramaswamy started doing campaigns and questionnaires about this. And then to me, it sort of faded back behind a few other issues. And now it's come to a resurgence again. And I will say it's probably because of you and a few select others that are willing to push this issue into the foreground. Now, as everything wraps up in the legislative session, this seems to be the fight that the stand that you and, like I said, a few others are willing to take. So I'd love if you would talk to us, break down what is going on with this pipeline and eminent domain and why it matters so much that you're willing to say, no, we can't wrap up this legislative session. We can't go home, basically, until we come to a decision on this issue. Why does this matter?
Well, I want to back up just a minute and say the topics that you generally talk about are the things that I put probably most of my effort into this session until this thing came to a head at the end of funnel. So this issue has obviously, as you said, has been around for a while, and it really is part of a multi-headed hydra, in my opinion. It's this whole green, what I call the green raw deal, this idea that we're going to identify carbon dioxide as is kind of at the nexus of human caused, well, it was global warming, now it's just climate change or climate catastrophe or whatever. But carbon dioxide is a byproduct of most human activity if you're using energy, unless it's nuclear, or I guess you could argue wind or solar, those things. CO2 is a byproduct of that, or an engine or whatever. So CO2 has been, I believe, very falsely maligned. Well, they called it a pollutant, and they said we have to cut that, or else the planet's going to burn up. The temperatures are rising, and that is the root cause. I don't accept that. I don't think it's settled science has been presented that way. So we have ethanol plants across the state of Iowa. Ethanol, which is made from corn being a major. I grew up on a farm, and we raised corn and soybeans. To increase that market share and as another use for it, we have had now for more, decades, a couple decades, we've had ethanol plants that turn corn into ethanol or into alcohol, which is added to fuel. Well, that was initially considered a renewable fuel, and it still is, but California and a couple other places have said, oh, well, we're not going to buy. We will use your ethanol unless you fix or address your I think they call it your carbon intensity, which in the end is just in view, it's really almost like a currency. They trade these carbon credits. It's a complex system, but it really comes down to this system of control. And they're saying, if you don't do something about the CO2 that's outputted from ethanol plants, we aren't going to use your ethanol, therefore your market will be reduced. And so that's the framework. And so the funding that they're actually trying to go after. So that leads up to, you have to do something with your carbon dioxide output, or bad thing. Basically, we're going to penalize you. Hence,
Okay.
it's almost like a currency. So the proposal was a number of years ago is that, oh, we'll take, because when ethanol started, it was a very subsidized process. And that process, as it's become more mature and more widespread and developed, it's more efficient, and it ends up with it's one of those, lots of things put out CO2, a coal plant or a natural gas plant, or I mean, almost a lot of things will put out CO2, your car. But it's not pure CO2. But ethanol plants, because it's a process that's been fairly refined to create alcohol, you do get a fairly pure form. I think it is very pure CO2 when it comes off carbon dioxide. So this idea was, well, we'll take the carbon dioxide from the plant and we'll push it through a pipeline. And we're that chasing funding, which is 100% subsidized, because they're not using it for anything productive. And they say, we're going to get it up to a place that's eligible for carbon sequestration, which means putting it underground, ostensibly trapping it underground permanently. Well, to do that, you take CO2, you pressurize it, and you push it through a long pipeline.
Okay.
There are some significant issues with that. I think that really is, when they did that first, I'm like, that doesn't, first off, I disagree with the premise. I don't accept the underlying rationale they would call, I hate even using the term science because it's not. I don't think it's very scientific. But pressurized CO2 is a cryogenic gas, basically, or a fluid. And so when you put it through a pipeline, it's in what they call a supercritical state. And it's not a flammable object. It's not like natural gas or propane, those types of things, or not so much crude oil, but those things are flammable. And if you'd have a breach of a pipeline and something to ignite it, you'd have an explosion. So I was a fighter pilot when I was in the military, and I would carry bombs on an airplane, and you study how, where this would hit, how what was going to be, where it would hit, how far would you achieve your purpose of actually destroying something, in this case, because that's what a bomb is intended to do. And then how far away would there be like collateral damage concerns?
Right.
In this case, the like a natural gas propane pipeline would have that similar kind of a principle. Well, the CO2 pipeline, you have this supercritical fluid that, when it's exposed to ambient pressure, turns into a massive plume of heavier than air, invisible, undetectable carbon dioxide. And sadly, it's not asphyxiant. Think like being in your car in your garage with the engine running.
Yeah.
But it's carbon monoxide. This is carbon dioxide, the same effect, but it's heavier than air. So it will stay as an intact plume, and it could even stay together for a couple of miles. And if you're in that plume, which you wouldn't be able to see, you could die or certainly be injured, and you won't be able to drive away because your car won't run, you can't breathe. And so there's just some real safety concerns with it. But that isn't really the fundamental issue. The fundamental issue with the CO2 pipeline is it is a private company. So a private company, Summit Carbon Capture, and there were two other companies before that said, oh, we see something that we can earn a lot of money, and we're going to help these ethanol plants have a reduced carbon intensity score. And they filed for a permit to run this pipeline through the state. And the IUC, or at the time, the IUB, the Iowa Utilities Board, went through hearings, and sometimes they were there, sometimes they weren't for the hearings. And that's one of the things addressed in HF 639, is just some of that process. But ultimately, they said, yeah, we're going to go ahead and say you're a common carrier and that you meet this standard for use of eminent domain. Eminent domain means they can condemn your property. They basically say, we can force our development through your land. And this mostly, we're an agriculture state, it has to do with agriculture. So this pipeline now will cross the state from ethanol plant to ethanol plant, ultimately going into South Dakota, up kind of close where I grew up in a farm, through South Dakota into North Dakota. They issued a permit that was conditional on those other two states. South Dakota, that state, basically, they went through quite an extensive process where it culminated in the people of Iowa saying there's no way that eminent domain can be used for a CO2 pipeline. And that got passed and signed and done. But it was way more emphatic than that. But that leaves Iowa with this conditional permit to build this pipeline through the state. And people that have not wanted that to go through land have been harassed, they've been sued, surveyors are on their land, and they basically already have the inability to sell their land or maybe get insurance or whatever. So, I mean, those are some of the reasons why this is so significant and why the pressure has built to this point. So the House in particular has debated this issue for a number of years, culminating in this year, this session. The House passed two bills, HF 639, HF 943, that address basically the use of eminent domain for CO2 pipelines and the definition of common carrier product, when what evidence you have to provide to qualify. And those, in my view, and I think I'm right. I mean, I'm certain I'm right. Those have not been met with the permit in front of us. And I'm part of a group I'm part of an intervening group of legislators that has sued the IUC in that process because we don't believe what they did was constitutional. But that's a long running process, and it doesn't necessarily address, or at least it doesn't sharpen our code to ensure this doesn't happen again. And this is better defining code, and that's what these bills will do. So I've tried to kind of lay the groundwork for this, and that's why the pressure is there. A little bit about the political process. So there have been bills that have been introduced in the House and the Senate for longer than I've been, which is now my third year. They've been ignored in the Senate for 3 years. They were ignored right up to the end of session. And 2 days before the end of session, they were all routed through the Commerce Committee. Well, the Commerce Chair decided to run HF 639, but he put his own amendment on it. And after the public could even before they could see or then therefore comment on that amendment, and then promised he was even going to what they call double barrel his amendment, or add a second degree amendment to his own amendment. And if he had done that, we would have ended up with an unamendable amendment that we would have just had to take a vote on without the due process of how, I mean, this is how legislators are supposed to work. I mean, everybody expects we send our senators and our representatives there. We're going to deliberate and discuss and refine and figure out what is good policy, and then it advances. That's what the whole funnel process is for. In this case, we had a completely reversing amendment that was introduced the day before the end of session, before the end of funnel, with a stated goal of double barreling it. And we would have already been voting on basically one person's bill written by a lobbyist or whoever. And so I intervened to basically look, I filed you can call it an adversarial move, but I filed a reversing amendment, a double barrel strike after amendment that took it back to the original language. And so that's, I guess, kind of what started the process in motion, is that now we have HF 639 at least on the calendar for the first time in the Senate. And that's what myself and 11 other senators, and I think others, are advocating, that there's talk about, well, we have to change it, or we have to whatever. I say we bring it up for a vote. As it was presented from the House, as it was deliberated on in the House, and as it was supported by over 80% of the House.
Yeah. Well, and there's so much there. You just you did an admirable info dump, my friend. I appreciate that. Thank you. I know more about it. Well, I didn't realize about the safety concerns, for example, of this pipeline. I do acknowledge upfront suspicion of anything that the greenie wackos decide is good for me. I'm like, I'm going to run exactly the opposite way, because I actually believe in the way that God created the earth. And I believe that we can use this well, just as our ancestors have, that we can be good stewards of creation without having to make life miserable for humans. I mean, it's been a strange dichotomy that we've embraced as a society, to say we actually have to actively make life worse and give government more control in order to make Mother Earth happy. Like, that's, sorry, paganism. Can't go there. Like, I thought we rejected that centuries ago, but nonetheless, here we are. And yet the push for this from otherwise, compatriots and friends at arms, I think, is the conflict for people as they're hearing about it, is why on earth would Republicans now, or conservatives who would normally agree on many things, be fighting about this, fighting amongst themselves. And that's the thing that I'm not sure I can well define, other than there are several business interests that probably, care and have a hand in these issues, or with these particular politicians, relationships that are built, and people kind of think there's might be some favors or some back scratching going on. And I'm not trying to call out anybody in particular, but I am always suspicious if in the political process we start to say, oh, well, don't look too much into this. We're going to amend it, then we're going to amend the amendment. We can't vote on anything else. Let's just pass this real quick and go home. That is always a problem. That's a problem with the giant omnibus bills that happen in Washington that drop at 3 a.m. and they're 3,000 pages and nobody ever reads it, and we just vote for it up or down in 90 seconds, and then everyone gets to go home and party. This is a problem with the political machine, with the way that politics tends to operate. It contributes to massive distrust. It also contributes typically to the great growth of government and to career politicians who have no incentive to stop the gravy train, so to speak, even if they come there with good intentions. And so again, those are all of my like on the table presuppositions. Just I'm going to be suspicious of all of that. But what I appreciate about what you did, Kevin, is or Senator Alonso, I appreciate the line that you've drawn in the sand, because now, and part of the reason you're getting a lot of attention is because you and a few others have decided that you're not going to vote for the ending budget, which is the great big thing at the end of the year. It's what makes everybody stay there. Basically, like, we can't go home until we finish this, until we address the eminent domain issue. This does matter quite a bit, but you're putting a lot of focus on it to say, no, we're not going to allow this to go to the back burner or to let someone else make these decisions kind of behind closed doors. We're going to debate it openly, and so everyone at least can see where their representatives, where their senators stand on this issue. And I think that's commendable. I appreciate you doing that.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I think that really is the key, and I had a thought, but while we were kind of going through that, but at the end, yeah, it's time to have the debate. The process has the House isn't unreasonable. The bills that are in front of us aren't unreasonable, and I think I really do believe those bills are worthy of discussion. Vote on the floor and put them in a law, and so we can move forward. But,
yeah. Well, and why is it then that I'm going back to our motto that one of the main rights that we ought to maintain are private property rights? To me, that's very important. And so instinctively, when I hear something about eminent domain, I'm like, I don't want the government to take over private property without, the property's owner. If this is your farm that your great grandfather worked hard to build, and now the government's coming in and telling you you have to use it again for the benefit now of a private company, which adds another layer to this, then you're not allowed to do anything else with it. They're forcing you to sell. They're forcing you to divest yourself of this for, whatever purpose. Automatically, I'm thinking, you know what? That's something we should use incredibly sparingly in a place where we claim to care about property rights, which are huge in Iowa. And I'd love if you'd speak a little bit about why that matters, again, to conservatives, to Christians that are in Iowa. Why is this such a big deal from that perspective?
well, I'll back up just a little bit. So they're going to put it. Their intent is to put a pipeline through people's land. So arguably, you put it through the pipeline, or quite a few pipelines across the state of Iowa, and people farm on top of those pipelines. So it isn't that, and that's some of the argument against it. It's like, well, it's just a pipeline. So people are being paid. They're being offered, and some people have taken a check, a one-time payment to put the pipeline through. But it comes with a permanent easement. So while the pipeline does lay underground and things are just transmitting through it, it has to be serviced. It has to, they could come back later and make changes to it, or repair it, or even sell it to another entity. So I mean, it's just not so clear that, while it's easy, it's just a pipeline, and there are lots of other pipelines. Those other pipelines are, at a minimum, they're being used for something that people actually use, right? They're transporting a commodity, a product that is energy, or at least it's a farm thing, like ammonia or something.
Right.
So that, number one, is a big difference. Number two is the fact that the product that's being transmitted is not being transported for other people. It's being transmitted through the pipeline on behalf of basically this network of ethanol plants, and just put underground, and just, well, in this case, I guess you could say it's just, well, they're using the term sequester. But again, that all of those things they simply do not meet the time-tested definition of common carrier and public necessity and public use, public convenience. So that's I think for Christians or for anybody, we have a constitution. I believe our constitution was written by godly Christian men and women, but men that crafted a document that is the envy of the world, and life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That pursuit of happiness is effectively saying you have the right to own personal property. And without that, I don't think you really can't have freedom. And you hear from people in other countries where they don't have the ability to consistently to own property on their own. They don't have freedom.
Yeah.
So it is, I think, again, I consider the Constitution to be almost like a covenant with God. And I think it's of critical importance. And I think it is really the fundamental reason why we have been such a blessed nation, why we are in the position that we are. And we take it lightly at our own peril, right? We have to do this because it's going to make more money. It's going to, some of this goes back to, and we've had some decisions in our judicial decisions in Iowa that have cited the Keeler decision. The Keeler decision is a out of state, I think it was in New Jersey, but a decision about condemning the land so you could basically turn it into something that makes more money for the government or the people, development. And the Keeler decision, I think, was a very flawed interpretation or decision that didn't honor the Constitution in that state. And we've had rulings in our state that have said, yeah, we're not going that far. And we have really strong property right definitions in our own Constitution. And so people will cite that Keeler decision. They'll cite, again, these subsidies. And well, if we don't, again, it's just that it's almost like fear of missing out. Oh, if we don't do this, then we're going to be behind the eight ball and our state's not going to make money. We won't be competitive. Well, if that's what it takes to be competitive, is to throw away our Constitution. No, thank you. We have to find another way. And there is other ways, right? I absolutely believe in the work ethic, in the communal values, the spiritual components, and the family, the community. Those things in Iowa are our key. It's not chasing after federal subsidies. I really believe in those federalist principles that taking, basically we should chart our own destiny. We should be a sovereign state. And anytime you get onto a public dole, like in this case, the federal government, you take subsidies from them, and yet it's always.
Yeah. It reminds me, when you just said that, it reminded me of two related thoughts that I believe are both from G.K. Chesterton. Friends, fact check me. But one is that before you start removing fences, you ought to stop long enough to figure out why the fence was there in the first place. And I think that about constitutional protections, even if it might be expedient or it might be more profitable to like tweak these laws or just sort of go around the laws, figure out creative loopholes that, our dear lawyers are so good at doing. It's a real problem when you start knocking down the old fences because they were there for a reason. At least figure out what they're supposed to protect you from. And then the other thought is that when you destroy the main law, the major laws, you don't get freedom. What you get is the tyranny of the small law, because then every single decision has to be adjudicated. Every single business wants a loophole or a carve out for them. Every single time, every single exception chips away continually at this major protection that was there for a reason. I think of that with the Constitution, again, created by people who loved and respected the rule of God's design, natural law, the laws of nature, and nature's God. So much so that they enshrined them for now almost 250 years and has stood the test of time, not without much combat, and it still continues to need to be defended so that we can continue to preserve these rights for ourselves and our posterity. So I do think that is a godly endeavor. I think it's hard to stand up courageously when it's easier to just allow these votes to kind of go through. Everybody just wants to go home, they want to be done and have a nice summer, and I think it takes special strength to be able to stand up and say, no, this really does matter. And we have to be on the record at the very least. We have to settle these issues. We have to do so publicly as men and women of integrity, do so on the record, not behind closed doors. And I think the people of Iowa deserve that. The people of America deserve that. So thank you so much for doing that. What do you hope happens as we wrap up our discussion? What's the ideal outcome from your perspective?
Well, the outcome that we want to see, that we're insisting on, is we bring 639, and my objective is to bring 639 with 943, which is that it's essentially South Dakota language saying eminent domain will not be used for carbon dioxide pipelines. So those two bills turn in basically amended so that we're passing the two bills that came from the House and we take a vote on the floor. That's the goal.
All right. Well, we will continue to pray for our leadership in the state. We kind of walked past each other at the state day of prayer, but we were both there for the governor's proclamation. That was really fun. It was a really a very powerful time of worship and prayer. And so my encouragement to our audience is to get informed. Hopefully this hour has left you better informed about this particular issue, but to continue to pray for our legislators, for our governor, for our officials in this land, and across every single area. They need prayer. They need guidance. Oh boy, do we all, but especially those who are in charge of making these decisions and representing the people. Again, they really do work for us as the people. And I praise God for people like you, Kevin, who know this, who understand the assignment, and who know why you're there. So thank you for speaking up for us, for property rights, for the right to life, and for our freedoms here in the state of Iowa. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And if you're listening and you want to get more involved, I'll go ahead and put the link to the emails down below, and you can let your legislators know how you feel about this and why this matters to you. So that's our call to action today. Until next time, we have a mission, which is to love God, to serve people, and to live free. Thanks for listening to FaithWorks Live. At FaithWorks Live, we're proud to partner with InnerVision's Healthcare. In unplanned pregnancy and STD situations, they offer help and hope. It's all confidential and it's all free. If women are in a crisis pregnancy situation, they know that they can get real help at InnerVision's. Free pregnancy testing, free STD testing, free ultrasounds as well to see that inner vision. Because women deserve the truth about their bodies, about their baby, about all of their options. And if a woman has gone down the road of seeking abortion through medication and she regrets that decision, InnerVisions also offers abortion pill reversal procedure, which is a life-saving, miraculous option to have right here in our own community. InnerVisions Healthcare, well worth supporting, providing those free services to women in crisis pregnancy. You can call them 24 hours a day at 515-440-2273. That's 515-440-2273. There's no better time than now to stand for life, and you can stand with Iowa's original pro-life organization, Pulse for Life. They're the longest-standing nonprofit pro-life organization in Iowa, and they're dedicated to informing, educating, and inspiring a new generation to value the sanctity of all human life, from fertilization until natural death. They serve at the State House, they educate in classrooms, at events. They proudly serve on the coalition of pro-life leaders. They are on the front lines of the battle against this throwaway culture of death that we see all around us, and we are winning ground. Hearts and minds are changing, and the pro-life movement is continuing to grow. And you can be a part of the exciting things that are happening right here in our own backyard at pulseforlife.org and get your finger on the pro-life pulse. Sign up for their newsletter, find ways that you can make a difference, and how you can change hearts and minds with their pro-life apologetics course, pulseforlife.org.